All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is Ryan McMinn. I'm a program manager for the Access team at Microsoft. It's day 3 of the conference now, I forget. I'm sure you've been in a lot of sessions, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff to kind of remember. It's good that they're recording it all. So I'm going to talk today about Access and the kind of transformation from Access from a land-based kind of solution into SharePoint and how that really helps kind of change the game for the product. I started with Access, building Access in 2001, consulting, building applications for IT departments, for insurance companies, for the record business, and I loved Access. It was a great and easy way to build things quickly and iterate and work one-on-one with people. And around 2004, more and more of our customers kept asking for the web. They kept saying, this is a great solution for us, but we really need to get it in the browser. We need to be able to extend the reach of it. We need to be able to control it better. And that was always a challenge. And I started a company in 2004 building Ruby on Rails web applications to kind of meet that need. And even though a lot of the new web frameworks make it easier to build web apps, it's still not as easy as Access. It's still not even close. There's still a lot of pain and setup and plumbing you have to do in order to build a web app that Access just kind of takes care of for you. So there's this big disconnect. And I came down to Microsoft in 2007, and they kind of showed me what they were working on for this release. I got very, very excited. I sold both my companies. I moved down here, and I spent the last 2.5 years working day and night getting this ready to show you today. So I'm very, very excited to show you the stuff today. And what we're going to focus on today a little bit is the more advanced side of building applications. So we had a talk yesterday that go through building a simple app. Today we're going to build something a little more complex. How many people made it out to our talk yesterday? Okay, only a couple. It's great. So I'll go through a little bit of the intro stuff and show you publish and kind of do an overview as well. So I'm just going to start off with a couple little features and then publish an app and start building the app and showing you some of the stuff. So we're going to start by building a new blank web application. So this is the getting started experience for Access 2010, which you'll see in a second. Great. And it's a little revamped. What we've done is made a big investment in templates, which is what we did in 2007. We made a first stab into templates. We really feel as a core tenet of Access, it's important for people to not have to get started from scratch. So you want to get people started with a baseline and then let them build and customize and extend. And we see that same kind of metaphor working with how we imagine applications being built by IT for users, in the way that they still need help developing the initial application, but once it's built, it's easy enough for them to tweak and customize and maintain it. So you're not getting called every time someone wants to change a font color or add a field or do basic reports. So we're also allowing community templates in this release. So users will be able to upload the templates they make to Office Online, and inside the getting started experience of Access, you'll be able to see those templates and start from them. So it's a great way to extend the reach and allow more and more templates and people to get started faster. So I'm going to show you a couple of little features in the schema design. So as you see, there's 2 options now in Access. There's blank database, which is the traditional Access client-based database. And there's a new option called blank web database. This is an environment that we've created that filters down the options you have for things that we know will work in SharePoint. So you can build an application, a web database, and know that everything you do inside this environment will go up to the web and be supported. So I'm going to make a little one here. I'm going to show a couple of the table features. So traditionally in Access, you had a SQL-style table model where you'd have a list of fields and you kind of add them one by one. For this mode, we really have more of a display model, so you can see the data as you're adding the schema. It's very easy for me to add items. I can kind of click and say I want a number and call it number 1. So editing schema is very easy. We also want to make it easy to reuse schema. We know that when people are building apps, they're using the same kinds of things over and over again. They're entering an address in every single database they have. They're entering a status field with different options. So we created a thing called data models. So it's the ability for you to save a collection of your fields as a data model and then reuse those in different parts of your database. So here I can go to my more fields and I can pick address. And that's going to bring in all my address fields in one click. It's very easy for me to put stuff together. I can also say, let's bring in some dates. So I can say I need a start and end date for this table, and I've got those in there right away. Now I might want for this database to know how many days are between these 2 dates. So I can put a start date in. We'll say today, and we'll say the end date of this task is a couple weeks from now. I want to know how many days are between these 2 things. So SharePoint has a great feature called calculated columns, and we brought that in Access as well. So now when I go to my field types, I can click to add, and I can say I want a calculated field. and I want it to be a number. And we get the Access Expression Builder. Now, traditionally in Access, expressions were very powerful but hard to learn because you had to know the syntax and understand all the fields in your table. So what we've added in Access 2010 is IntelliSense everywhere there's an expression. So now when I start to say I want my end date, it'll pull up the list of fields for me, and I'll say minus my start date. So it's very easy for me to quickly build expressions. I can save that, and I have the days. And if I want to save that collection out as its own, I can grab this, move it over, and I can save these as their own data type. I'll close this and not save it. So when I go to make a new table, I can pick that data type, and I get all those things built right in as well as the calculations. Go ahead. So the data types are stored. He asked, how do the data types stored? They're stored as template files in a directory. So you can actually, once you've made them, you can send that file to somebody else. They can put it in the folder, and they can use it. You can share those. You can even use a group policy to put them in a certain place. Cool. So that's a quick little demo. I want to kind of get into the more publishing stuff. And so I'm going to open up an application that we already have made. So this is an issues database. It's a database that tracks issues. In this case, we put in a bunch of bugs from Firefox. Which brings up that we do fully support Firefox in our web rendering, and we love Firefox as well as Internet Explorer. And it also, all the applications you build will also work in Safari, which is really cool. So this is a kind of application that we see a lot of people build. It tracks issues, open issues, closed issues. It has real through the ability to create things. And I'm going to kind of dig into the different features in our logic engine around this particular application. So the first bit of logic I want to talk about is UI logic. So this is kinds of things you do to navigate through your UI or affect your UI in different ways. Not really data related, but more kind of surface level stuff. And in this case, one of the things I want to show you is creating a new issue. So when we create a new issue, I should log in. All right, log in as me. I get my pop-up form, an Access Common kind of dialog form, and I can say, I have an issue. I'm really tired after last night. That was quite the beach party. I can choose a category, I get my pull downs, that kind of stuff. I can choose a description. Actually, I don't really want to do this in Access. I think people have seen this in Access for years. This is common stuff. I really want to show you the stuff in the web. So I'm going to close this down. I'm going to put this application inside of SharePoint, and we'll go through all the stuff in the browser instead. So it's very easy to publish. I can pick my server and give my application a name. I can now publish this application up to Access Services. Now in Access 2007, we allowed you to move your tables up into SharePoint, and you still had all of your application living in an ACCDB inside the client. In Access 2010, we've taken it to the next level. We've now moved your entire application up into SharePoint. Your tables and data have become SharePoint lists, standard SharePoint lists, and the data has been moved into there. All the forms have been turned into ASPX pages that render in a document library inside the browser in SharePoint. All of the reports that we're going to make and see get turned into RDL and get rendered on the server as SQL Server reports. The UI logic that I'll show turns into JavaScript and gets run in the browser. And the data macros, which are a brand new construct in Access, which I'll get into as well, get turned into SharePoint workflows and get run on the server side. And all of this is done without using code. So you don't have to write code to create it, and we don't turn it into code on the server. And what that means is you don't need to be a SharePoint Uber admin to install this application. If you can create a team site, you can publish an Access application. If you're a contributor, you can go to an Access site and you can edit data and work with it and execute the macros and the logic. We made a big investment in this because we felt it's important for Access to lower the barrier for people to be able to build and manage these things and not have to have super high rights privileges and super high security privileges in order to run them. So now that we've successfully published, it's always nice to see the checkbox whenever I do a demo. It always makes me a little happier when that pops up. We can go into the browser and take a look at this app. And we spent a lot of time getting the rendering to be as close as possible to Access to give you the real consistent feel between the client and the server. So this is that same form now rendering in the browser. I can click on an item and see the details. Let's go to log in again. I'll do that. Log in. And I get all the same kind of back and forth stuff that I get inside the Access client. It's really neat. So now let's dig in and kind of see how this works. So the runtime environment will run in the browser and in the client, but the design environment is in the Access client. So we need to go make changes to this application or update certain parts of the form or schema. You do those in the Access client, and you sync them back up to the server. And it's pretty easy to go back and forth. I'll close this app down to kind of give you a sample. When I'm on the browser, I can just go to Options and say Open an Access. And that will open up the Access database for me and sync all the objects down, and I can start working from there. Great. So now let's take a look at making a new issue on the web, and then I'll show you how we do it in Access. Oh, well, I've already got real tired at night there, so I'll say, still tired. I can pick my category, and I can give it a description. We have a little bug that we have in beta 2 with some of the selection not being exactly the way we want it. So usually there we go. So what we're doing here, and I'll show you this in a second, is we're actually not only saving the record. Of course, my spelling isn't the best there. Notice that. We're also running a data macro, so running some logic in the server. And what that logic ends up doing when we go to look at this record again is it's now entered our information, but it's taken that description and it's actually entered it in as a comment in a separate table. So there's a bunch of logic we can do to kind of do that sort of thing, and I'll show you that. So let's take a look at this in Access and see how we built it. So I can go to my layout view, click on New Issue, and build the event. And we made a big investment in this release in the macro designer. Traditionally, the macro designer was a step editor, and it had been the same for a number of releases. We really wanted to rev that up and give you a lot more flexibility in the macro environment. So you could do things like full if statements, local variables, error trapping, the kinds of things that you would normally do in VBA to give you the expressiveness you need to build an app while still inside the low security environment to allow you to be able to publish it and work with people without having them to click through a bunch of different options or have high privileges. So in this case, we've got some simple error handling up here. And we're also got some login checking. So you notice when I clicked it, it asked me to log in. So we can do some checking on a login to see if they're logged in or not. We can use temporary variables to store their login information. And then we can open up a new issue and open up that form. So it's very simple to open up a form. So let's go look at that form itself and see the stuff that's on there. Again, once we log in, I'll be Steve. And then our Save button, we can actually run some quick checks and say, OK, let's make sure that they've specified the summary field. And let's add the description if it's specified. So what this is doing is running a data macro. So data macros, the best kind of analogy for them is they're very much like SQL triggers or SQL stored procedures. They're pieces of code that you can place on the data level so that you don't have to write a bunch of code on buttons that you have to reuse or remember to put every single time you make a new button. You can put them on the data layer, and then every single thing that calls that will hit that option. And with the run data macros, you can actually have named ones that aren't attached to a table event, but you can call from a button and say, go run this. And that lets you put your code in one place. So in this case, we're calling the comments a data macro, and it's going to add a comment to the description field. So we can go take a look at that data macro. It should be under add comments. Here. Great. So when you open up the tables now in the table chunk, you'll see you have a bunch of options, and these are the data macro options. You can do things like before change, before delete, after insert, a bunch of record level events, which I'll get into in a few minutes. In this case, we have an edit name macro, and it's called add comments. And this gives us the ability to pass in parameters and then take a bunch of data actions. On the side, you'll notice there's data blocks for creating records, for editing records, that kind of stuff. I'll get into that in a little bit as well. And the next thing I want to show was kind of application-based stuff that you do on a form to make sure that data is getting entered in properly or that you have sort of a process. So in this case, in our issues database, we have a process for how an issue works. It comes in as opened. I can then resolve it, and then I can close it. So how do we kind of manage that process through the UI? So let's go through, and we'll do one up in the browser, and then we'll show you how that works. So I can go to I'll go to really tired after last night. Right now, the status is new, and you notice that the resolution is set to disabled, so I can't edit the resolution yet. When I change that status to resolved, now my resolution field opens up, and I can edit a resolution. I can say, okay, I'm going to say that's by design because I knew what I was getting into last night when I went out late. So, and I can save and close that. So again, it's running a data macro that's doing some stuff that I'll show you. So let's go back in Access, and we'll take a look at that form. So when I go to my status new field, I can put events on the after update of that field. In this case, it's pretty simple. I'm on that event making sure that my resolution is disabled. I can now check and see, hey, if my status is set to resolve, go ahead and open that field up so someone can edit it. And I'll close that. And then on my Save and Close button, all I have to do is basically save the record, and I can pop up an error there as well. So let's take a look at what happened on the server. So now we see we've got a status that's being resolved. It also tracks that I resolved the issue and that I resolved it as by design. So those are data level operations, which I'll show you in a bit. So you can really tie in the UI to a bunch of data operations and have a lot of process automated for you in Access really easily. Cool. And then let's actually go ahead and close that issue so we can see it in the Closed Issue button. So we'll go ahead and we'll say now that is actually closed completely. Interesting. What's going on over there? It's exciting. Great. So now we go to our closed issues, and now we have our we have a different tab with basically a different filter on that same set of data in the data sheet. And I'm going to show you the on-click event for that too. So when we click this, we get our kind of drill through. And how do we do the drill through in Access? It's pretty straightforward too. We go to our closed issues. Go to our property sheet. It will do it for me. It's unhappy with me. Is that what it was? Thanks. A little bit of extra entertainment this morning. I didn't plan that, believe me, just to make the things go faster. Great. So in the Macro Designer, you get the ability to add comments too, which is great. So here we can kind of take a look at the code, and if we have to go help someone with something, we have a quick and easy way to see what they meant when they were writing stuff. And here we're checking to see if the user is logged in. If not, we can open up that login screen that we saw. We can also give the user a chance to log in, and then we can go ahead and open that form. So down the side, we've got a bunch of our actions, and this makes it much easier to figure out what different things you can do in Access. And if you're not sure, you can even use the search. So if I knew I wanted to do form-related operations, I can look at form-related options that way. So it kind of gives a mixed way for you to kind of look at it in the code view, but still have the advantage of a declarative model. You can also expand and collapse to see a better view. So this really brings everything really small. So if I've got a lot of code, I can kind of dig in as I need, or I can expand all and see all the details behind each thing. And when I click on a section, that section highlights. I can kind of move the section up and down. I can drag and drop the section. And all my input boxes kind of appear, my expressions appear. So in this case, if you see it says form dirty to see if the form's been changed, my IntelliSense works here too. So I can type in form. And this makes me a lot faster to go through and work through stuff. Let's save that. So those are some basic macros that kind of let you navigate around the application. A lot of what you want to do is a little more advanced stuff, like do some searches. And doing searching using filters and access is pretty simple. So if we go back to our browser and close this down, go to our open issues, and if we are searching for an issue, we can use our search box that we made. So if I know the issue contains email, I can do that, and very quickly I can search through my data. And it's pretty simple to set this up. So we'll go back to access here, and we'll go to our search box and our property sheet and our macro. What we're doing here is we're basically setting a temporary variable, which is the contents of what's in that text box. And then we're doing an apply filter based on the where condition on the query we have. So it's pretty simple to set up. And the tricky part is, how do you search a bunch of different fields at the same time without it being really complicated? And that's where the Access Query Engine comes into play. So what we're able to do with our query, which I'll show you here, is use an expression to create a searchable set of fields. So if I go to my issues extended query, I have a searchable field that's a concatenation of all the different things I want to search. So if I, in the future, want to add a new field to search, I can add it to this expression, and the search will automatically pick it up and work. I can kind of mix and match which fields I want that kind of global search to work through. So it's a combination of a pretty simple filter and a query, and you can get a lot of really cool stuff done with the search capabilities. And then I want to show you a little bit of reports. So in this database, we have a report center. We have a bunch of different reports to kind of track information. I can pick on issues by category. As I mentioned before, we save our reports out to RDL, and we now render them in the browser as SQL Server reports. So you get all the advantages of SQL Server reports in the browser, like being able to export to Word, being able to export to PDF from inside the browser. You also get a great experience across browsers for printing, which is really hard to do in a lot of cases. Reporting and printing is definitely a challenge anywhere you do in a web application. I remember when we used to build web applications years ago, you would spend months trying to get the printing just right for a very long, complicated application form. And RDL and SQL Server makes it really easy for us to take the Access reporting builder, which is very easy and intuitive to use, and get that same fidelity on the server that you get on the client. So the UI macros are really about programming the user interface. They're platform independent, which kind of means they'll run completely on the client and on the server in the same way. They respond to events on forms and controls. So whether you click a button or you can put events on controls like pull-down boxes and text boxes. They don't interact directly with data, only through the bound controls. So they don't actually go and change data. They only work with stuff that's already changed. And they give you a lot of program flow options, the variables, the temporary variables, ways for you to capture information, store it, and use it in other places, as well as parameters. So you can pass parameters to data macros, you can pass parameters to reports, and use those as a kind of programming model. So the next thing I want to talk about a little bit, I'm going to switch back over to slides, is if you have any questions during all of this, just let me know, and I'll try to answer one. Go ahead. So the question was, does this work with external tables as well as access tables? So the way Access Services works is the tables that were in this database that I made are the ones that I can build web forms and reports on top of. And when we create this web database, we're actually creating a subsite inside of SharePoint. And all of our stuff lives inside that subsite. So all the lists inside that subsite that we made through Access, we can use web forms and web reports for. Now, if we wanted to do more advanced stuff and link in tables and sources from other parts of SharePoint or from BDC or from SQL, that's all still available in the client. And that'll all get stored in the server. So in this application I have here, if I had linked tables in this database, we will store those linked tables for you in SharePoint, but we can't run them in the browser. We can't run forms based off of them in the browser. Those are only in the client. So that's a key separation point, is that these are really designed around kind of departmental level tracking applications to get you up and started quickly, and you build the web forms on top of the forms that are in that site. If you want to start extending out and getting other lists, that's really something you do at this point in the Access client. And it's definitely a great question because it's something that we've been looking at, and we definitely see in the path for Access to start to bring that in. It's been one of the things that Access has been great at as a landing pad for data, a place that you bring data from all sorts of places and do stuff with it. And the client will still do that, except now you can manage your database inside of SharePoint and get some web forms based off the data you have. Go ahead. Yeah, so his question was, can you piggyback off the SharePoint login? And totally, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. This particular database that we're trying out, we want to be able to run as well in the client without SharePoint ever as in the server, as the templates we ship. So we kind of have our own rolled-in login. There's one feature that wasn't quite working, so I pulled it out, and that will check your SharePoint login and create one for you in the system, so I don't have to log in. But that wasn't, but I'm going to show you that in a second too. But yeah, so we have an expression called current web user that'll let you, inside of Access, get the SharePoint information. So you can get their username, their email address, and their display name. And you can use that to help customize your application. For example, if you wanted to have a My Issues tab that only showed you the issues that were pertaining to you, you can do that kind of thing as well. So here are a couple of scenarios that we see around data macros. And data macros are a big investment for us. One of the challenges we had moving to the web is, what do you do with VBA? Because it's code and it's not meant to run in a service, and it's very hard to scale it up, and you have to have pretty high level permissions to run code on the server, we really wanted our macro engine to be able to take care of that heavy lifting for you, to be able to enable those scenarios. And data macros and how we kind of design them really map well to SharePoint workflows, which is what they turn into on the server, to give you the ability to have the full workflow system working for you. So a couple of the scenarios we see are, things like change validation. Don't allow this order to be saved if the customer credit is bad. Change tracking. Make a note in the database whenever a customer is deleted. You can kind of track that in a log. Notification. Hey, if someone makes a big donation, I want to send an email to a certain person so they can take some action on that. Workflow. Set the assign to field to open by when a bug is resolved. So you can kind of do some tricks there. And aggregates, I think, is the big one that I want to talk about for a second. Another one of the challenges is Access Query Engine gives you a really rich way to do totals and aggregates and sums. And bringing that to the server is very challenging because one of the tenets of SharePoint is you don't want one application or one query to affect the service. So you don't want one person who writes a bad query that requests too much data to bring the whole farm down. So we spend a lot of time restricting the options we give you to things we know will not only successfully work in the browser, but will successfully work inside your service. So our applications aren't negatively affecting SharePoint, that we work within those bounds inside those monitoring throttles. And aggregates was a challenge for us in the query layer in that it was very hard to safely bring the flexibility of Access aggregates to SharePoint and really make sure that it would work in a safe and scalable way. So data macros are how you do aggregates for Access services. And because they're at the data layer, you don't have to worry about not putting them in all the places they need to be. If you're doing a running total on an after insert, that's always going to happen because it's on the table. So every time someone changes that information will get updated. So in this case, you can update an order subtotal when a new order detail is added. What that also gives you on the server is better performance. So when you're running a form or a report, you're doing much less joins because you're only going against the main table. And that gives you a lot of advantages there too. We also give the ability through data macros to do bulk updates. So one of the examples that we have is if I've got a project and a bunch of tasks and I finish the project and set it to completed, I probably want to make sure all my tasks are set to completed too, so I can have that action be based off of the other one and do kind of bulk operations. And that's the same with kind of custom calculations. You can have it set up so if I have 15 tasks in one project, as soon as the last task is closed, the project is automatically closed. So you can do the logic in the other way. And data macros really give you that ability. So before data macros are the simplest form. They're before change and before delete. They fire before the item is committed to the table. They can be run more than once and client again on the server. So they really happen before data goes in, and they're really great. They're designed for speed. in SharePoint, they get turned into quick flows. So in SharePoint, they run as quick flows, and they're pretty fast. And that really is around validation. How do you validate data before it goes into the database and make sure it's the way you want it? You can do if statements, you can do lookup records, and you can do data manipulation. So you can adjust records for that individual item. And here's an example of one. We can say if the ship date less than the order date plus 7, we can raise an error back to the user and say, hey, we need more time to ship that order. So you can start to create some business logic and have that business logic affect all the parts of your application. And the other kind is after data macros. So these are actions that happen after a record is committed. They fire after the change, they can run longer, and they cover the other scenarios like change tracking and the notification and the workflows and the aggregates. All things you want to do after you've created that record. So here we have a bunch of the same things. We have if, then, and else. We also give the ability to look up a record or to loop through a set of records and take an action. And we also, in the after updates, let you call another data macro. So you can chain data macros together to do more advanced logic. And we give the ability to stop all the macros as well. In here, you can edit records, you can create records, you can set fields, undo changes. You can also delete records. And you can pass through variables. And a couple of the ones here are like log event and send email. So you can log events to an event log, or you can send email to people based on an action that's been taken. So here's an example of a tasks after update, where we're going to keep total of the total number of tasks for each project in the project table. And every time a task is added, we can update the project table and give it another number. So that's an example of our aggregation. And the last kind of data macro before I get in and show you some of them working is a name data macro. So this is a data macro that isn't attached to a particular event, but you can call it from the UI. And you can pass parameters to it and have it go take some data actions and then come back. Oh, all right. Let's get back and show you some more stuff. So I showed you the add comment data macro. One of the other ones we have is related issues. So in this database, I often have one issue that's related to another. So we can open up the details of the issue, go to related, and we can add a related issue. We can pick one. And now in the background, it's running those data macros as workflow on the server. So when it pops back in, we'll zip back to the client and show you what that looked like. Great. So if I go into the client and do the same thing, go to my layout view. So now what I'm doing is I'm opening the form up as a dialog, the form that we picked the related issue from. And after I come back from that choice, I'm actually running a couple data macros. And these data macros are going to go and link those two items in a related table list, in like a many-to-many list. So this gives me the ability to have a bunch of data activities happen, but controlled through the UI. So it's not based on an event happening, it's based on a particular button click. And then a couple of the ones that are on the events, so we can go to our issues table, open it up. Here we've got a couple that are on events. We've got an after update, and that after update does a couple things. One of the things it does is it says, hey, if I've been updated, my status has been updated, I want to go add that status update to my comments table. So you notice when I changed it to by design, I got a couple things mentioned in the comments table saying, Ryan changed it to by design, and Ryan resolved it on this date. And that's how we do this. We can, at the table level, say, if the status has changed to this, go do this action. If it's updated to resolution, go do this action. And this way, we have an easy way to put the logic in one place and have it work everywhere. And we'll take a quick look at a before change one as well. So this is more of a validation. What I can do is I can make sure that if someone's selected 3 resolves, they've said, hey, this issue is resolved, but they didn't select a resolution, I can pump back that error to the user and say, you need to set a resolution if you're going to say it's resolved. I don't have to do that at the UI layer. I can do that at the data layer. And that way, if someone uses a data sheet or a form, or later on in the database, if someone's customizing it and they make their own form for it, I don't have to worry about them not getting the data right and data getting into the system that isn't valid, because my table rule will manage all that for me. Now I'm going to quickly bring up one of our customers, Mike, from Connolly Consulting, who's going to show you a couple of the data macros in a database that he's created using our tech preview. So everyone, welcome Mike up to the stage. You want to just get that on while I open your database up?
So a little bit of 2 seconds of background to orient you into what I'm showing you. My company is an auditing company. We get a lot of highly sensitive data in the course of doing our audits. And so security is a big issue for us. And we actually use Access and have been using Access for pretty much since version 2.0 to front-end SQL Server because of its rapid application development capabilities, right? So it's always really good at doing that. We have billions of rows of data behind it, and it actually does a great job of getting stuff into the hands of our auditors quickly. But on the flip side, we have this security, right? We have all this sensitive data and how we're going to manage security. So as part of the TAP, what I got to do is play with the software really early on and have a lot of fun with the data macros and the UI. And it tremendously easy to do. And I'll show you a couple of things. I mean, probably I cover every scenario that Ryan went through in this application, from change tracking. I even did a little search thing. And it's all very, very easy to do when you get down to it. So first, I'm going to just open this application in Access. And I'm going to take you into layout view. So as part of this application, I created a way for users to anonymously submit incidents. So they saw something going on. They want to let you know. They just want to tell you about it. They don't want anybody to know anything about them or be connected to it anyway. So I just had a little UI form pop up. They add the record. And that record goes into an incident report table. So when my director of security compliance hits his dashboard every day, which has a bunch of reports and metrics for him to really do his job well, he sees that a new incident came in. So from there, he's able to say, okay, this thing looks good. I'm going to actually create an incident and start an investigation around this particular incident. And so, nothing really we haven't seen before. There's a couple pieces of information that came in that table, and I'm just picking that information up and sending it through to the incident table, which is where he manages the investigation. And so I'm grabbing a couple parameters from the data, incident date, who was involved in the description, and I'm calling a name data macro. And once I call that name data macro, I'm actually, that record's inserted in the table, and then I'm requerying the control. So let's take a look at how that looks in real life. So you see the record's here. And what we should see is that record disappear once the data macro is completed. And now, so I have that incident report table. If I was really feeling, really feeling good about writing data macros at the moment I wrote that, I might have also included a parameter for the ID for the initial report and wrote back to that table in another data macro to say, this is the incident that it became. So you can actually have a trail of where it came in and where it left. The other one I'll show you is really at the table level. So one of the things that was important to us is when there were incidents, we wanted to be able to maintain a time-locked tally of how many times that particular person had done the same thing. So, I shared my password with, another employee. I got caught. If they did it again, we wanted to know about that. And I wanted to make sure that, even if somebody somehow got into the table data, that I would at least have the total as of that point in time. So picked a data macro for that. And actually there's two, one after update, one after insert. But what I'm doing in this particular data macro is I'm starting out with a count local variable. I'm getting the person for the record, and literally I'm looping through the existing records that have the same person and the same incident type, getting the sum total of that, and then on my current record, I'm putting that value in it. So we can keep that forever. So being kind of like a long-time access guy, big SQL guy, I mean, this has always been the piece for me that, you know, I wish I could write a trigger on a table. I wish I could, you know, put some of my business rules down at the table level instead of VBA. So I think these guys did a great job at this stuff. So I would give them a hand.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. We didn't pay him too much to say nice things, but it's great we're really excited to have customers that we've made work with in the TAP partner program and have them come up and kind of show stuff. So thanks for coming, Mike.
They answered my question.
So there's one more little demo I want to show you and then talk for a couple seconds, and then I think we should just get to questions. And this demo I actually made 5 minutes before I came here, so fingers crossed that it works. There we go. So this is a simple little table I made, and it's got basically YouTube video IDs. So this is a new control we added in Access called the web browser control. We wanted to make an easy way for you to bring in simple web content and display it inside of Access through using URLs. We noticed that a lot more and more websites have a lot of the information about the record itself inside the URL, and it's kind of hard sometimes to parse that and use that, so we wanted a way to be able to do that. So this little demo I kind of whipped up just to show that quickly. It's not very business-related context, but the videos are business-related. So I've got 3 YouTube videos on my table, and now I can make a form. And on that form, I can put a web browser control. So I can click and add that to the form. And ask me for my hyperlink address. So here I just take a standard YouTube hyperlink address. I paste it in. And our web browser control takes a look at that URL, and it pulls out those parameters, and it puts them in a list for me. And so that's pretty cool. So now I can see the different things that I have options for. What I really want to do is I want to bind this ID to the table, so that every time I change records, it's replacing that ID with the ID value for my table. So I can use our expression builder, and for my field list, I can say YouTube. That's the name of the field that I had those IDs in. Say OK. And now I've binded it. So I'm going to enable the content and access to show that form. Yes, we'll save it. So now I've got my YouTube showing up inside of this, and it works for any URL-based website that supports parametered URLs. I can kind of navigate through my records, and every time I navigate, I'm now getting the updated YouTube form, which is kind of cool. And I can even move that up to the web, so I can go publish that up. And this one should publish a little quicker. There we go, very nice. And if I look at that form, I now get my YouTube control right inside the form, and I can navigate through my records and get the different ones there as well. So it's a really great way for maps or things that have parameter-based URLs to kind of bring that functionality into Access and give you a richer view for your forms and reports, both in the client and the browser. And just to finish off the demos, I just want to show you quickly the thing that you mentioned about getting the SharePoint username. So we'll go to issues. So using current web user with expressions, this is a simple form, not bound to any data. It's just bound to the expressions. I can get my ID for my user. I can get my system name, so system account's the name of this particular user. I can also get the full domain name. So in this case, it's SharePoint/system. And if this system account had an email, it would appear in this field down here. So this really allows you to do inside of Access in the browser is not have to worry so much about logins when you're doing a web app, because you can leverage the SharePoint logins, and you know who's logged in via SharePoint. You can customize the interface for them. And you can also use it for when they're entering records. Instead of having to track who entered what, kind of SharePoint manages that for you, and you can leverage that same structure. So I just want to come back for a second and talk about where we really see the user value for Access and Access services. We really want to be able to provide business users a manageable solution to create, share, and collaborate on team databases. And we feel that Access has kind of been, on the desktop, a really easy way to do this since we released Access 1.0 in 1992. And that really hasn't changed. People will be able to build quick applications. What's really changed is users' expectations about where those applications live, how they're managed, how they're accessed, and how the user interfaces is created. And Access 2010 helps address some of those things. We really wanted to create a manageable environment so that IT doesn't have to see Access as a problem anymore, that the data can be centrally managed, centrally permissioned, and centrally backed up without giving users or without preventing users from the ability to create and build themselves. So we really saw with the web app development world kind of schism develop between developers and users, where once you got into a web app, there was developers and there was people that used the application, and they didn't really meet with each other. And if you needed anything done or anything tweaked or anything adjusted, you had to go back to the developers to get them to do that. And it created an environment where it was very hard for IT teams to build all the applications that a department might need, because when you factor in the maintenance cost over a long period of time, it just simply was too expensive to do them. And we feel Access gives the ability to have the web, but still let business users create reports, create queries, create forms, without having to have IT there to do everything. And still have the data managed and the application managed through SharePoint. And since they're standard SharePoint sites, you can track usage the same way you could track usage for any SharePoint site. All the same things that are available to SharePoint are there in terms of controlling who can see the site, who can't see the site, compliance and regulatory stuff. So a lot of that comes back to saving customers money through lower development and maintenance costs. You know, we've known for a long time that a similar app in .NET will take 3 or 4 times or 5 times as long as it does an Access. But .NET gave the ability to have a lot more control and flexibility. And we feel bringing Access to the web kind of brings Access back into that world a little bit. And we're really all about getting started quickly. So we think users can get a long way without any assistance through our templates, through our in-part model templates, the data templates I showed you, as well as online help. Well, great. So I'll open it up to any questions if anyone has any. Go ahead. So his question was, once you've created an Access Services list, is it different than a regular SharePoint list? No, it's exactly the same. It's a standard SharePoint list. So anything you can do with the SharePoint list, you can do with the Access list. Yes?
What if you want one of them to end up being a document library set? You know, you want it to be part of the database, but you also want users to be able to act on it. So control what kind of SharePoint list is created.
So in Access, the question was, if I want to create different kinds of SharePoint lists, like say document libraries, can I do that inside of Access? So Access really supports only custom lists, so basic lists. You can have attachment fields and you can attach documents to those attachments, but you can't create a document library and do all the schema for it and build a form on top of it inside of Access Services for this release. You can still do all that stuff in the Access client. The Access client gives the ability to link to a document library and do all that stuff inside of Access client. But if you want to render it in the browser, you need to have just custom lists. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, I've built my application up, and now I want to move it to a test environment, then to a production environment, and deploy it in a bunch of other places. How do I do that? So in Access, we have the Access template format, which is ACT-DT. And what you can do is, when you've got your application in a state that you want it, and you've tested it, and you've published it, you can save it as an ACT-DT. And that ACT-DT will actually instantiate inside SharePoint without Access. We put a bunch of code into SharePoint to allow you to upload an ACT-DT to a solution gallery and it'll become a standard SharePoint solution. And then it'll appear in the create page inside your site collection. So that's a great way to deploy it. And people can go inside SharePoint and say, create new site, pick one of our sites, hit go, and it just creates the Access Services site. And if they don't have Access Client, they can run the application in the browser, they can edit data, they can work with it. They only need Access Client if they want to change schema or change the look and feel of a form or do design time stuff. But running the application is completely through SharePoint. The question is how it cycles through SDS admin export import. It's just a regular WSP once it's uploaded, so it'll act like any other WSP. Yeah, well, some of that stuff should be taken care of. That was a great question. Go ahead. Great. So the question was, what about old Access databases? And this we hear a lot. People have years and years and years of Access databases that they've got built up, and they want to get some of the same value out of them. So there's definitely two sides to the SharePoint implementation. If you want to have your forms rendering in the browser and your reports rendering in the browser, they need to be created inside of Access 2010. But if you have an older database, you can migrate it in and just store the application definition in SharePoint. So I'll give you an example. If I had an application that only ran on the client that I built in 2007, as long as the schema was correct, i.e. it matched with SharePoint, I can publish that to Access Services. And Access Services will store all the lists as lists and all the data in those lists. And it'll store all of my client objects, my forms, my reports, my VBA, my link tables, in a system table inside of SharePoint. So the next time an Access client connects to that site, it'll sync down and get them all the latest stuff, and they can run that inside the client. So you can take your legacy applications with some adjustments and move them into SharePoint, and then you can manage and deploy them through SharePoint. And there's a great talk this afternoon at 1:15. What room is it in, Steve?
I'm Steve Greenberg. I'm the other Access guy that's here today.
He's the other pink-shirted person.
Yeah, we're the two guys in pink shirts. Yeah, we have a talk today right after lunch at 1:15 across the hall in Breakers B. And we're going to be demonstrating how to bring forward Access databases from previous versions and manage them. And we'll show a couple of different solutions for that.
Great. Go ahead. So this feature is part of eCal. So it's part of SharePoint eCal SKU. So the question was, what if I'm in SharePoint Foundation, what are my options? It's part of the eCal SKU, like Excel services and Visual services, part of the enterprise.
One of the things we'll also show this afternoon is some options for getting some manageability with SharePoint Foundation or even WSS.
Yeah, there are some options of things you can do. Not the full-blown thing, but there's definitely some options for base Foundation too. Go ahead. Yeah, so the question was around permissions. So all the Access client and its communications with SharePoint goes through standard APIs. So everything is done in the context of who you are. So in this case, I happen to be already on this domain, and so it knew who I was, and I didn't have to worry about the login. Normally, it will actually prompt me for credentials if I'm not already set up for login. And I would have to have permissions to create team sites or create sites in order to create one of these things. But if I put permissions on it to say, this one table is important, only one user can look at this table, no one else can, those permissions are respected inside of the forms and inside of Access. So if someone else navigated to that site and tried to look at that data, they wouldn't be able to see it. Does that answer the question? Yes, so it completely follows the permission model inside of SharePoint. So if I want to add people to my site, I just go through the regular site permissions model. Go ahead. So the question was, can I assign permissions based on the objects, on the forms or reports? So you can't do them on the objects. You can only do them on the data. So you can say that this particular table, only one person can see. And if they open up a form that connects to that data, they'll see the form, but they won't see the data. The challenge there for us is we're generating all these things for you. So we store all of our form definition as XML in our system table. And when you update that system table, we go create the ASPX page for you. So it's kind of a generated page and somewhere different. So the question was about scalability and Access being limited previously, and now how does it work inside of SharePoint? So we've done a lot of work this release in terms of scale, and I've got a talk tomorrow morning at 9 that goes into details about all of our server architecture. What we did is build an application server on top of SharePoint that manages our data layer. So we can scale up. You can have 1 million records in a table the same way you can in SharePoint. You're still restricted in terms of how much data you can work with at one particular time. So in SharePoint, you don't want to go over 5,000 or 6,000 records at a time, and you're on a base list or you run into issues. And you'll find with the new release of SharePoint, if you have a list that has 10,000 records, you won't be able to just sort and filter on it. They're two big operations. So our middle tier will take care of a lot of that for you. And I have a demo that shows 40,000 records, and you can sort and filter and work with them in a standard way, and that kind of scales up as well. Go ahead to the back in red. So it's still the question was, if I upload into the solution gallery and turn it into a WSP, what are my kind of upgrade options? So really, there isn't a direct path at this release in terms of how exactly you upgrade. Once it gets created, it's its own kind of site, and you could go to that site itself and upgrade and put new things into it, but it's kind of self-contained at that point. It's not connected back to a master anymore. Yeah, so you can open up an access, and you can change it and adjust it. You can also import from another database. So if you had a database you made all the updates to, you could open this one up and import all the new objects in, and they'd automatically sync. So there's a bunch of options, but it's not a full path. Go ahead. So it'll lock itself to read-only when it's compiling. But because it's multi-user, people can continue to work on it while you're working on changes. So that definitely is a challenge. What you can do in that case is you could change the homepage form of the site so that you saw a different page that said under construction, and then change that back when you were done. Go ahead. So the form design experience and access is table-based for this release. So it's pretty simple to move things around in a table-based thing. You can add new columns, it's very similar like Word tables. It's very fast to get things up and running. There's the talk I did yesterday, there's a video of actually building up a form completely, if you want to check that out. It kind of goes through about that in detail. But it's a much improved experience, as well as you get the visualizing of the data. So access is all about not just one form, but multiple records in a form too. And it gives you the ability to see the data in line when you're making your adjustments. You don't have to switch back and forth all the time. Go ahead.
Is there any concept of access client runtime?
So the question was, is there a concept of an access client runtime? So we've always had a runtime environment. What that basically allows you to do as a developer is take an access database and create a CD out of it that you can give to a user who doesn't have access. They can put the CD in. It goes through a standard Windows install, and it installs enough of access to run the application, and they can run that app on their computer, and you can update it and stuff. So that's still part of access. We're actually shipping that with the product now. So it comes with the product, the runtime engine, and you can take an application, package it up, and deploy it to people who don't have access on their desktops.
Can you do like a web install of that in this context with SharePoint? So you did have an application that needed the client, that you could make it easy for them to
So we haven't connected the, well, I mean, not really, no. They need to have some kind of access in their machine, and if they had the runtime installed on their machine, they could run a web app, and they could bring it to the client, and they could work with it. But there isn't one package that does all of that for you. So you'd have to just have them install the runtime generically, and then they could go to the SharePoint URL, click open and access, and it would just work. So it will work. It's just not, you can't package it in one package and just send it all out. Go ahead. So the performance is the same as any other SharePoint list, any other SharePoint form. It's all in the same architecture. There's no difference between that and regular SharePoint. So the question is, if I'm publishing very large tables to Access and now I'm opening them back in, what are the challenges there? So what we do in Access in this release, which is different than the last release, is we store all of your data locally in a cache when you're syncing to the server. So the idea in 2007 was you hit the SharePoint list, you have to get the entire list objects or items back before you do anything. The next time you hit the list, you go through the same process again. Where in Access, we're actually caching them locally now. So the first time you open up a database, say you open from web inside, from the browser inside of Access, it might take a little while to get all that data in. Once it's done at once, you're now working locally, and all we're doing with the server is checking with the server to say, hey, did anything change since the last time I opened? And maybe 15 records changed. Okay, let's sync those. So the performance after first run is much improved. Go ahead, back. Yeah. So the first question is when you're writing. The question was, can you write workflows inside of this for other lists? And then the other question was, once I publish my lists up there, can I do other things on top of them? So for the first question is, you really can only write the macros against the list inside that site using the actions that we have. So the actions we have aren't every single action that you get with workflows, but it's a decent amount of them. And for the other question, once you publish the Access application up to the server, they are just SharePoint lists. So in our talk tomorrow, we have a customer who has a demo of writing event receivers on top of those lists that then go and do other stuff inside of different parts of SharePoint. In that case, he pushes approved skills into the taxonomy engine of the SharePoint profile system. So once the lists are there, you can actually go add stuff on top of them. Access won't really know about it, but you can kind of extend it that way. Go ahead. So the question was, he has a bunch of applications that are very VBA heavy. Has there been thought to have a conversion process between VBA and data macros? And yeah, we definitely thought about that. It's not something we haven't been able to get to in this release, and we've been working with some third parties who think it's interesting too as a possible add-in potentially. The challenge with VBA is there's so many things you can do, picking which ones to bring them in. We've always had the engine and Access to take a macro and turn it into VBA, which we still have, but going the other direction is a little more difficult. That being said, if you have those applications, you can publish them, and we'll store the VBA inside the server, and you just will always run it through the client. Go ahead. So the question was, is it viable as a prototype tool to start off and build your application, and then once you've built it, bring in something like Visual Studio and start extending it and building on top of it? That's not a scenario that we really designed for. There's nothing to prevent you from doing that. The forms we make are standard ASPX pages. The reports are RDL. You can go in and edit them. The challenge you have there is if you do go back into Access and change them, you'll overwrite any edits you made because we're just generating the files. So there definitely are some options there you could explore. It's not the core scenario for us. The core scenario of this release is really building simple tracking applications that people can build rapidly and use that are kind of self-contained. Go ahead in the back.
If your Access application is built where the data is separate from the forms, or maybe in a separate wiki file, can you preserve that kind of model? It sounds like in the SKU environment, the data and the forms and reports are all together and they sync.
Yeah, you could maintain that other model if you wanted to, but it would only run on the client. So the question is if he had a database that was split, so he has a back-end and a front-end database, you could move the back-end database up to SharePoint, and you could move the front-end into a separate SharePoint site. You could keep them split. I'm not sure what the advantages would be of having them split at that point. I mean, I think the challenge with Access, the main reason you'd split the data is multi-user. So you don't want everyone going to one Access file to do everything because you run into issues with corruption and multiple people on one. Where this is a service, so you can have multi-users on the one site very easily, like any SharePoint site can have multiple users. So the question was, how does the syncing work if I got tens of thousands of records but I only want to change one form? So the first time you ever loaded it in, the data will start syncing, but it'll sync in the background like Outlook does. So while it's syncing, you can go in and change a form and sync it back up, and that will all work. Once you've synced your data down once, it's always on your system. So every time you open up that Access database, we're just checking with the server to see if there's updates. So it's very quick for you to go do it at that point as well. Over there. So the question was, is there any integration with BCS for external data? We have external data with BCS allowable in the Access client, and we'll store that connection, but it's a client-only thing. You won't be able to have Access forms in the browser render connected to BCS data in this release. It's only data inside that site itself. If you have Access, you can open up the client and you can connect to all that stuff too. Go ahead. Yeah. So the question was, how does the offline stuff work if I go offline? So we have full offline support and Access. So if you take this application, you unplug your network cord, you can work with the data, you can actually edit and design the forms as well. Well, as soon as you get back to a connection, we have a full conflict manager that'll sync those changes back up to the server for you. So if you go on a plane, you can add records, you can work with data, and you can change forms and then sync back up when you get off. Go ahead. So there's a full conflict manager. It'll pop up and say, this record has a conflict with this other record. It'll show you both. You can pick which one you want to pick. You can't do schema design offline because schema design is live. So if you want to add a field, you have to be connected because you're actually adding that field to SharePoint right away. Well, great. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, we'll be at the booth. Thanks. We'll be at the SharePoint Composites booth for the next couple hours, and Steve's got a talk this afternoon at 1:15. It'd be great to check out all about IT manageability.